Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Luke Blackall, standing in for Joe Elvin, but don't worry, we still have our usual roster of experts and commentators dissecting the big stories from the House of Windsor, and there are lots this week. Let's start with the interview that's ruffling royal feathers.
How did it feel being back? Being with her?
Being with her, it was great. It was just so nice to see her. You know, she's on great form. She's always got a great sense of humour with me, and I'm just making sure that she's, you know, protected and got the right people around.
Well,
her.
you make her laugh. That's what she always says. Did you do it again?
Yes, yeah, I did. Both Meghan and I had tea with her, so it was really nice to catch up with her. And you know, home for me now is you know, for the time being, it's in the States, and it feels that way as well.
Does it?
Yeah. We've been welcomed with open arms, and it's got such a great community up in Santa Barbara. So
you feel like that's home more for you?
Yeah.
That was Prince Harry speaking to NBC Today's Hoda Kotb. The interview is across the front pages today. The Daily Mail calls him the Duke of Delusion. Now, the person who wrote that piece is the paper's royal editor, Rebecca English, who we can hear from now. Rebecca, we've just seen that clip. What did you make of the very curious comments about making sure that the Queen is protected and has the right people around her?
Well, curious is a very apt word to describe this pronouncement, isn't it? And it certainly raised eyebrows at Buckingham Palace at the suggestion from a man who hasn't really even been in the country for two and a half years is to cause the Queen immense personal heartache, and has actually only flown in for kind of, you know, half an hour to see her, but yet is proclaiming that he is the person that should be protecting her and ensuring that the right people are around her. And of course, who does he mean by the right people? I mean, we all know Harry has an historic hatred for the so-called men in grey suits, the senior courtiers who advise the Queen, who he feels have tried to keep him from his grandmother in recent years. But of course, they're not the only people in the Queen's life. There is a really devoted coterie of long-standing royal servants, people like Angela Kelly, who's probably her closest aide, Paul Wybrew, her page, Tony Johnston-Burt, who's the master of the household. And these are people who have served the Queen loyally for many, many years and only have her best interests at heart. So does Harry mean her family? Is he saying that she's not being well served by those loyal family members that are still in the country and are working on her behalf and spending a great deal of time with her? Who knows? But of course, you know, this is very typical about Harry pronouncements, is the devil is in the detail, and we're not quite clear what he means. And I understand from my colleagues who are allowed to speak to his PR people that they have declined to elaborate further on what he might mean. So I suspect this debate will run and run.
We heard him make the claim that he and the Queen talk about things that she can't talk about with anybody else. I imagine a few members of the family will have something to say about that.
I'm sure there are going to be a few choice words as they read the papers over the breakfast table today. I don't know what they think exactly, but I certainly know from speaking to my sources, the kind of feeling amongst the palace staff is that this particular pronouncement showed quite breathtaking arrogance on Harry's behalf. There's no doubt he has a very warm relationship with his grandmother. He described it himself as special. She has a real soft spot for Harry. She's always been really concerned that as the kind of spare to the heir, as the younger of the two brothers, that he is equally protected as William. I think she rather loves his kind of air of rebellion and irreverence, probably because she herself has never had the liberty to have either. But to say that she can discuss things with him that she cannot discuss with any other member of her family is really quite a remarkable public pronouncement.
Many were hoping that his recent visit might have been the start of a rapprochement. How do you think this affects things?
Truthfully, I think it will only add to the sense of wariness that many members of the royal family have when it comes to Harry now. Possibly not with the Queen. She's very keen to keep lines of communication open with him. She loves her grandson, and as someone said to me yesterday, that her ability to separate family from work is quite remarkable, and she has an enormous capacity at being able to kind of just smooth things over and just try to keep moving forwards. But I don't think that is the same for other members of the royal family, particularly the Prince of Wales, who's said to be at the end of his tether over this, and Prince William. And I think what William will find particularly hurtful is the comments Harry made about their late mother Diana, about how he feels that she's done her bit for William in kind of looking after him and his children from beyond the grave, and now it's time to do something with him, which is quite a peculiar thing to say, and I think shows Harry's levels of general resentment against his brother. And I know from William's point of view, in the past, he's made very clear he finds this kind of any, I suppose, attempt to kind of claim ownership of his mother quite crass. And I suspect he'll find those particular comments from Harry quite hurtful.
Thank you, Rebecca. Time to hear now from our panel. And here this week is author and historian Dr. Tessa Dunlop and the Daily Mail's diary editor Richard Eden. Welcome both. Richard, royal interviews tend to fall into two categories, the naive and the calculated. Which one do you think this was?
To me, it seemed really calculating. I mean, come on, Harry's now married to an actress, and I get the impression that he's given guidance, tips, he's prepared for this type of interview. It was meant to be about the Invictus Games, which is a really worthy project. There's some really fascinating stories there. But, oh no, it's all about Harry. And everything he said, the calculated digs at his family, you know, it was a real hark back to the Oprah interview. And it seemed to be very much calculated and planned for, I think.
In terms of him being calculated, you know, on the one hand, we always say, oh, he's not always the sharpest knife in the box, you know, God bless him and all that sort of stuff. And now you're saying he's capable of extraordinary calculation in an as-live interview. I don't believe Harry is, to be honest with you. I think what he is very aware of is the need to walk a fine line, a tightrope, and that's super challenging. And you saw him sort of darken box. It was an extraordinarily uncomfortable watch, I felt, from that point of view. But I don't think it was cynical or calculated.
But Richard, many will notice the similarities, I think, between that and the Oprah interview. In particular, the line is sort of unclear comments about security and the people around the Queen without naming any names. It's sort of a bit like the claim of racism without naming any names.
I mean, regular viewers of this programme will know that, you know, I was left furious after that Oprah interview, particularly by that they threw those accusations out there. And what was so damaging was it was left hanging. They sort of suggested that the royal family was racist without naming anyone, and that led to all sorts of speculation. It has ever since. We saw how angry Prince William was after that, with good reason. Here we are again. I think he's doing it. He's got everyone talking about what does he mean by protection? Who's not looking after the Queen? You know, even the Prime Minister is asked about, is the protection adequate for the Queen? And we're all trying to see who's he having a dig at.
Oh, it's quite obvious, isn't it? Who's having a dig at?
I don't think it is obvious, and I think he wants it to be left in terms of protection.
Yeah, who do you think he's having a dig at?
I think that it's all tied up with his very strange court case, where he's alleging that he's not safe in this country. So by coming back with his wife, no problems whatsoever, he wasn't hassled by anyone, it would suggest there's no safety problem. So I think he has to justify that by saying, actually, I was coming back for a sort of visit to check my grandmother was safe. I'm sort of checking on security.
Tess, you have someone in mind. You have someone who you think it is.
I have a very different take on that. It's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, and that does give grist to your mill that, you know, we're all speculating and coming to different conclusions, because I very much saw him accusing the Queen's private secretary, Sir Edward Young, who, of course, the accusation has been that that was the man who didn't find the right role for Meghan, which is why Project Meghan and Harry failed and they exited. And of course, he's still in situ and the buck stops with the private secretary. And I felt that Harry was saying, you know, I want to make sure the right people are around my granny, i.e., God, get that, you know, old boot away from the Queen. That's how I read it, not about her physical sort of bodyguards.
Well, that's the point. There are lots of candidates. There's also Angela Kelly, who is very much the Queen's right-hand woman. She's got a new edition of her book coming out with exclusive revelations about her work with the Queen. We know from other books, I mean, there was a book by Robert Jobson which I think touched on the row over tiara or something before the wedding, and that very much involved Angela Kelly. So there's a suggestion there that...
And so too, presumably, Prince Andrew, whose proximity to the Queen has been questioned recently too. So, I mean, I know, Tessa, you say it wasn't calculating, but surely Harry knows enough and has experienced enough in the world of the media, having grown up in the spotlight, to realise that making comments like that do leave an awful lot of interpretation.
They do, but even sitting here now, under pressure, the cameras are on. We do this week in, week out. Arguably, this is our profession. It isn't Harry's. Harry's a professional prince, or he was until a couple of years ago. I don't think that he will have deliberately sought to undermine the royal family, but rather I think his game was trying to insert himself into that family from the outside, sort of say, look, I still have a hand in this, I'm still relevant in the Windsor narrative, which of course is kind of a double bind because he deliberately chose to exit the royal family. So none of it quite makes sense, which is why he seems to go round in a circle tying himself in knots.
Let's not get away from the whole point of this trip, which is money. And it all illustrates the Queen's wisdom, because she didn't want them to mix up charity work with commercial work. The reason they're here, the reason Meghan is here, who has no role in Invictus, but there she is giving speech and stuff, is because they're being paid a lot of money by Netflix.
Let's flip that around, Richard. The reason the Queen saw them is she knows they've got star quality. Compare, I hate to do this, but compare Meghan in a Valentino white, absolutely wowing the crowds, and dear Kate in that very staid 1940s Amelia Wickstead coat.
Oh, you were really winding me up now, yeah.
Well, I knew that would upset you, Richard, because I know you're more of a Middleton kind of girl and you like the sort of twin set and pearls 50s look. But all I'm saying is, who's speaking to the future generations, the younger generations? It's Meghan. The Queen's a wise old bat. She knows that the royal family has to be a broad church, and on that balcony, ideally for her Jubilee, that broad church needs to be represented.
So you think that Harry, I mean, he's non-committal in the interview, but you think he and Meghan will be back on that balcony?
I think if the Queen had her way, and actually if Charles had his way, the pair would be back on the balcony. But Harry and Meghan are in a bind. They've made a big hoo-ha about security, and they don't want to be in the slipstream of the Cambridges and the Wessexes, who'll have far bigger roles, the Trooping of the Colour, etc., than they will. So that it's very uncomfortable for that couple, but they will call it, not the Queen.
Richard, do you want to see them there?
No. I mean, the problem is, it's a family event. The Queen gathers all her family. It's not just working royals. You'll see Linleys and all sorts of people, and that's what we love about the Trooping the Colour and when everyone goes on the balcony. So it would be a natural time to have those other members. The problem we have is, you have Harry and Meghan there who have insulted the royal family at every opportunity and undermined it, in my opinion. It really feels like an insult. I think it's damaging to the institution of the monarchy.
It's about redemption. The Queen knows that. She's lived long enough to know that you have to forgive and forget. And I think that's one of the main reasons why she facilitated that half-hour meeting. Incidentally, I thought much the most interesting bit in what Harry said, he was just trying to muscle in and try and pretend he's close and got leverage over the Queen in that Queen comment, I felt. The most interesting bit was him ducking on the subject of William and Charles. He talked about his own family, i.e. his children, and he didn't address his relationship with his father or brother. And I think that's where the sadness and the pressure point lies, especially with his memoir coming out.
Just want to ask one last question on this. You mentioned redemption there, Tessa. Richard, we've seen a little bit of this recently. We've seen Andrew's proximity to the Queen. It's brought him back into the spotlight, to the chagrin of many in the media, I think in the family too. We've seen the Queen elevate the position of Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, who's now going to be Queen Consort, as are her wishes. Is Harry trying to follow the same thing while it's still possible?
Very much so. You saw that with his comments that come across as slightly absurd, really, about his sort of special relationship with the Queen. But they're all sort of taking advantage of the Queen in her later years, I think, for their own reasons. We've talked on this programme about how significant her endorsement of Camilla as Queen was, and that's the sort of thing that Harry's looking for. I mean, I dread to think what's going to be in this book, but no doubt we'll have at least a chapter gushing about the Queen and including special things that, she's told him. But that's the difficulty for the royal family, isn't it? When it's sort of our family as well as
But there's a wonderful irony, isn't there? That you can kick the institution, complain about the institution, but somehow the CEO, the head of that institution, is untouchable. Perfect. Like, it doesn't work. It's a nonsense. And we all know it is, and we go with it just because the Queen she's the Queen.
Speaking of Her Majesty, today is her 96th birthday, so many happy returns, ma'am, from the team at Palace Confidential. Let's head back now to Rebecca English for more on the big day. Rebecca, can we assume that today will be spent privately with family?
Yes, a very happy 96th birthday to Her Majesty the Queen. She'll actually be spending the day quite quietly at Sandringham, her Norfolk estate, where she flew yesterday. The Queen, like her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, is not one who likes to make a fuss on their birthdays. In fact, I suspect she'll spend much of the day just having a look around her 20,000-acre estate there, maybe going for a visit to the Royal Stud. Of course, there'll be her favourite chocolate cake from the staff, but actually Charles and Camilla are in Scotland, William and Kate are undertaking engagements. There might be a visit from the Wessexes or maybe even the Princess Royal. I suspect there'll be more visits for family over the weekend, but otherwise it will be just as the Queen likes it, unfussy and low-key.
But we have had the release of her new portrait.
Yeah, we've had a lovely birthday portrait release, which is actually taken on behalf of the Royal Windsor Horse Show, which is an event that the Queen is obviously very closely associated with. In fact, she hasn't missed a single show since their inception in 1943. And the photograph was taken at Windsor last month and shows her in front of a glorious magnolia tree with two of her beloved fell ponies, which she loves so much. It's a very happy, relaxed, serene and quite informal photograph. And I think it's one that shows that even though her health is not that she is able to ride at the moment, but she can still take a great deal of pleasure from her animals, particularly the horses that she loves so much.
Bar the odd virtual engagement, we haven't seen her much recently, but you write today there's going to be one big event she's going to try to get to in June, and I'm not talking about the Jubilee.
So in today's Daily Mail, I've written quite extensively about the Queen and the Epsom Derby, which actually this year is going to be one of the key events on that wonderful 4-day weekend we're going to get to mark the Queen's historic 70 years on the throne. The reason why the Epsom Derby is so special is, as we know, the Queen is a passionate racehorse owner. She also breeds at the Royal Stud. And it is the only one of the 5 flat classics that she has never won. The nearest she came was in 1953, which was 4 days after her coronation, in which her horse Oriole came second. So how fantastic would it be that she would actually finally claim that last prize in this her Platinum Jubilee year? And I've been told by staff at the racecourse as well as the royal household that they are doing everything they can to make sure she gets to the Epsom Derby on Saturday the 4th of June. The Jockey Club are looking at ways to make sure that she has minimum fuss and minimum effort to do so. They're even looking at ways to bring her official Bentley off the racecourse for the official arrival and right up to the door of the Queen's stand where the royal box is, so she doesn't have very far to walk at all. And the route will actually, quite movingly, be lined by 40 jockeys, both past and present, who've ridden for her, wearing her very distinctive purple, scarlet and gold silks. I don't think, as I say, we can take anything for granted, but I think if there is one event she's going to be at in June, it will be the Epsom Derby.
Stories like this kind of show just how little we now expect to see her. With Charles stepping in for lots of the big engagements, does it feel as though we're increasingly getting a regency in all but name?
This is quite a cheeky question, Luke, because the R word, the regency word, is not something the palace like to discuss. Now, of course, as the Mail on Sunday raised at the weekend, we are being led to understand now that, you know, we aren't going to see the Queen on many big public occasions. If she does, it will be a bonus rather than an expectation. And senior members of the royal family, particularly the Prince of Wales, the Duchess of Cornwall, but also the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, are doing much of the heavy lifting now. But don't forget, the Queen does still do virtual engagements. She's even opened a hospital virtually recently over one of these video calls. And of course, she does deal with those red boxes of official papers that she's required to do so as our head of state every day bar Christmas Day. She'll even be looking at some today, her 96th birthday. So I think while I understand why this is being debated, I think it's kind of unfair to write her off at this stage. And, you know, Buckingham Palace are keen to stress that she still takes her duties as head of state very, very seriously indeed.
Thank you, Rebecca. We'll head back to my panel now. And Tessa, a story in the Mail on Sunday last week suggested that we should assume we won't see the Queen anymore except at big events.
Coronavirus has actually, ironically, provided her with a sort of natural transition path from public to private, and of course gives the option of virtual appearances. So while she wasn't physically out and about, we felt very much in touch with her. She gave a couple of seminal, very well received speeches to the nation and of course to the broader world at the time. And I think that it's not a regency but name. Very much the Queen's imprint is on her own rule and across the House of Windsor, and we see that just through the way in which all family members still look to her and covet her approval.
But as you say, there is still that stepping back, Richard. Do you think people accept that, or do you think they'll at some point want something a little more decisive if it's been a really long time since we've seen her?
It is an awkward time, really. I mean, I think in an ideal world, I think the Queen would retire. She'd be allowed to have a retirement that she's owed by us all, I think. But it has to be with her wishes, and if she doesn't want that, then we need to find this kind of new way of operating.
Can I just profoundly disagree with the honourable gentleman to my left?
You're welcome to, Tessa. Come on.
I mean, this is the nonsense of monarchy, the divine right of kings and of queens. You know, you are appointed by God. If you really believe in the magic of hereditary monarchy, then you rule until the day you die. And who does Elizabeth hold up more than anyone else? Victoria, who, incidentally, the latter half of her reign, nobody saw her for love nor money, hardly.
You only have to look at European royal families, and they've handed over, you know, many of them have in Spain or in Holland, and this type of thing. It's not a big deal. We're still very much hung up on the 1936 abdication, but it shouldn't be an issue. I mean, goodness sake, we've got 2 popes at the moment. You know, one of them, didn't he turn 86 or something this week? You know, so if we can manage with 2 popes, we can perfectly well have 2 monarchs.
I would argue that the very reason we're talking about our royal family and not the who, what in Europe royal families is precisely because we've held fast to, some would say the nonsense, others the magic of hereditary monarchy.
Let's talk about the new portrait we saw today, Tessa. What did you make of that?
Beautiful. I think we need another series of the Game of Thrones so that the Queen can make another virtual appearance. I mean, she looks absolutely splendid. And what's interesting here is this reflecting her real deep true love. I'm sorry, Harry. The people she talks to the most freely are these boys. They chew hay and they don't talk back and they give her no problems. Lovely fell ponies.
And you mentioned there true love of horses. We talked about the Epsom Derby, Richard. I mean, it just shows how much she loves racing and how much importance she places on it, that it is such a priority for her to be there in June.
It will be great if she makes it, and great if she has a winner, I think, after all this time. You know, it's seen as the world's greatest flat race, so it would be wonderful to have the Queen there.
For those who wonder, how does she stay sane when all around are losing their heads? That is the answer. She was born in the same year as Margaret Thatcher, and I once read a wonderful biography of the two, comparing them. Thatcher's hobby was politics, so when her political career died, more or less she died with it. For the Queen, she's been able to keep her state role, her family affairs separate from that real true love, that hobby. Hobbies are really good for mental health. Let's hope she has a winner.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of people hoping for that too. We're not going to give anything so certain as a tip here on Palace Confidential. Well, one thing that is for certain is the Windsors are a family in transition, and among the topics up for serious discussion at the moment is where everyone is going to live, with the Cambridges looking at joining the Royal Hub in Windsor and questions being asked about Prince Andrew continuing to benefit from the royal pool of houses. The Mail on Sunday's Kate Mancy has written extensively about this, which we're calling the Game of Homes.
Well, this is a fascinating story that's developing week by week. It's a kind of royal right move. Where will the royals go? I broke the story some time ago now that the Cambridges are very seriously considering a move to Windsor, which begs the question, where will they end up? We've got Duke of York, although he is no longer HRH, he is no longer a working member of the royal family. He's still ensconced at Royal Lodge. He paid a lot of money back in 2002 for the renovations and in return was allowed a very long lease on the property. But it's not in great shape. How will he continue to provide for its upkeep? So there are real question marks over whether he can remain there, whether he ought to be allowed to remain there. Meanwhile, you've got the Cambridges looking for a place in the vicinity, so it'll be interesting to see how that develops. It's been widely reported that Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have been looking around schools in the area and very much intend to put their children into prep schools there, mixed prep schools, so quite different from what we've seen before with the royal family. But yeah, there's definitely a sense that the tectonic plates are shifting within the Windsors. There's a bit of everything's up in the air, the sense of transition. We've got Prince Charles doing more, we've got the Cambridges doing more, we've got Andrew now doing much less, and who deserves to live where. It's a kind of monopoly board, really. Well, there have been meetings with Keeper of the Privy Purse, but ultimately these decisions will rest with the Queen, and when he becomes king, the Prince of Wales. So lots of kind of family meetings to be ironed out as to who goes where and who's looked after. For example, you had the Sussexes who were going to be lined up to have Clarence House when Charles becomes king. That now seems very unlikely, seeing as they've moved to the other side of the world. So it's all to play for, I think, and we're going to see some really interesting times coming up in the royal family of who moves where and where the seat of power lies, which I think is fascinating.
Kate Mansi there. Now, Richard, we talk about Royal Lodge, and it sounds like a nice little cottage on the Windsor estate, but it's a pretty substantial home, isn't it?
When I hear the word lodge, I sort of think of a little sort of wooden cabin or, maybe something on a caravan park. But no, this is a mansion, let's be honest. It's been expanded and expanded over the years. It's got, I think it's about 30 rooms, 7 bedrooms. I mean, my goodness, there was an intruder at one point last year, I think. They didn't manage to find her, wandering the place. So it's very much a mansion, and Prince Andrew's very lucky to live there.
And still be there. Tessa, can you see them kicking Andrew out? He's going to be there for his days?
I think as long as the Queen is alive, Andrew will stay put. I mean, that was absolutely our monarch's seal of approval of her love for her son at Philip's memorial service. And I think, heart is where the home is. That's where Andrew's home has been. Whether that's the right decision, whether we can separate the Queen's private purse from the public purse which supports the royal family, that's a different question. But I don't think you're going to uproot this man who's going to be in a sort of perennial crisis now for the rest of time.
But what's for certain, Richard, is there's going to be a lot of scrutiny about these houses and who lives where and the amount of land in the royal zone. We're a country where huge housing crisis and, Charles is talking about a slimmed down monarchy, William's talking about fewer staff. It's harder to justify having all these properties, isn't it? So, there's going to be more scrutiny on this.
I think it's very tricky for Prince Charles when he becomes king. That's when the crunch will come. And people will ask, why is Prince Andrew having this huge mansion at these great terms? And then obviously Prince Charles has many, many properties himself. So I think that's an issue, and people might be expecting some change, and the changes we've heard about don't seem to amount to much, really.
I think that's slightly unfair, actually. Charles has made it very open, his plans about giving the public more access to the likes of Buckingham Palace, which has an incredibly short season, given how popular it is, and how many pounds they could rake in. I mean, there's a big refurb to pay for. So I think you'll see the public footfall increase in all the big, popular palaces. As for Andrew, I'm wondering if you can't sort of wang in Beatrice or Eugenie and sort of gift them the lodge, and yet he sort of lives there in the sort of servants' quarters. It's rather like the idea of him coming back as a valet, serving his own family. What do you reckon?
A new job for Andrew as valet and the game of homes. There are definitely stories we'll be watching closely here on Palace Confidential. That's all we have time for on another busy programme. My thanks to Dr. Tessa Dunlop, Rebecca English, Kate Mansi, Richard Eden, and to you, the loyal viewers, for watching. Joe Elvin will be back in next week. Goodbye.